storytelling today. So the first, the first question, so let's see a show of hands. How many of you feel like you get storytelling and you understand why it's valuable? All right, show of hands, how many feel like you're still working on it? You're still kind of figuring out where storytelling fits into what you're doing. And then the third one would be like, how many of you are just starting out completely cold? This is your first experience and you're still trying to get going. All right, well, that's helpful for us to see because it tells us where we are today, and we'll talk a little bit about this at the end. So with that, Melissa, why don't you go ahead and get going?
Fantastic. So today we're going to talk about, of course, why storytelling is your superpower. And you're probably wondering why we've used such a strong word about that. Jim, can you go to the second one? And then Jim's going to talk about how to find the right stories and share the right stories in the right places. Next slide. And then I'm going to talk about how you can actually craft your own personal hero's journey story. And today we're going to be sharing a lot of information with you, but also don't worry because we are going to share with you 2 handouts, if Jim didn't tell you that already, that will go over everything today. So tomorrow when you get the recording of this, you'll also get handouts that'll help you go into the next step. And then 4, finally, Jim, next slide. Of course, we're going to have time for your in-depth questions to make sure we can get you to where you want to go by the end of this presentation. So I'm going to jump in right away with why the heck is storytelling your superpower? And it's the next slide, please. It's literally the way our brains make sense of information. Next slide. It's in our DNA. But unfortunately, in recent history, this hasn't always been the way that we've shared information. We've been really about just the facts, man. And we've lost the art of storytelling. The challenge with sticking to the facts is that unless they're your facts, and there's few of them, nobody can remember them. The way we remember things is through storytelling. So let's go through the 3 scientific reasons that I want you to remember today. So I'm just going to share 3 of them to make it easy for you. The first one is this one right here, which is neural coupling. And that means when you're reading, watching, or listening to a story, a part of your brain activates that actually inserts you into the story and turn it to your own experience. So think about this. This is why many of us have felt the force within for Star Wars, why people are crazy for Downton Abbey or The Crown or many other types of popular shows. Because of storytelling and neural coupling, we make it our own, we make it personal, and we become part of the adventure. Next slide, please. The second reason is mirroring, and that is when you're listening to, reading, or watching a story, the same parts of your brain are activated that other people around the world throughout time, their brains have been activated by this story. And when the storytelling is live with the storyteller themselves. So back again, 1 slide, please, Jim. Yeah, so storytelling breeds compassion and it allows sorry, we want to keep being on the previous slide for just a second.
I'm trying here.
Yeah. It's wanting to be very, okay. So storytelling breeds compassion. It allows people to see the world from a very different place. Think about the book Uncle Tom's Cabin, that at the time was the best-selling book of its day and age. Before that time, people in the English-speaking world thought that, frankly, slavery was almost okay. They didn't see it. They didn't see people who were slaves as real people. It's said that Uncle Tom's Cabin helped set the stage for the Civil War. So that's just 1 book. And the third reason is dopamine. So when the brain of humans encounters an emotionally charged event, such as a story, it releases the neurotransmitter of dopamine. And that makes things much easier for people to remember related to that event. So people can remember stories, they can't remember data. Now, data is really important. So when you need to share data, wrap it in, illustrate it with a story, and people are going to remember it much more clearly. So emotion drives giving, especially of our attention spans. Now, I'm going to turn it back over to Jim.
Thank you, Melissa. So when I learned that listening to a story caused these neurological responses in the listener, I realized that that was exactly what I was trying to do as an advocate, to get people to listen, care, and act. And that's when I started to see storytelling as such a valuable tool for advocacy. By the way, I'm going to use the term advocate to refer to you and to all of us. You may not think of yourself as an advocate, but through your efforts, you're advocating for safer, more accessible streets and neighborhoods and a better quality of life. And so in my book, that makes you an advocate. So let's hold that term lightly, try it on, see how it feels. As an advocate, the most effective the most effective stories you tell are those that are that serve a specific measurable goal and influence the specific audience that can help you achieve that goal. That's the most important reason to tell a story, to have the impact that Melissa just described. Once you know what you want to achieve and how you need and who you need to influence, you can start focusing on the stories that will be most effective and the best ways to tell them. I'm going to walk you through a thought process for thinking about that. So first, think about your goal, the problem you want to solve or the change you want to see made. That's the whole reason you're doing this work, to accomplish something specific and measurable. This could involve getting a piece of roadway infrastructure installed, such as a traffic signal or a path or a bridge, or it could be an organizational goal, such as having funding to pursue a project or a campaign or to deliver a service. So you want to think very specifically about your project or goal. And then you want to ask yourself these questions. What specific action is needed in order to solve the problem or make the needed change? If you're pursuing an infrastructure improvement, for example, the action might be getting public money allocated to that project. If you're trying to deliver a service, the action might be getting supporters to donate money so you can hire staff or purchase materials. Then think about what groups or communities would benefit most from this problem being solved or this change being made. If the traffic signal got installed, who would benefit from it? If you raised the money, who could you help? The stories of these people are likely to be the most influential for your purposes. So you want to be able to come back to this question over and over. Now we want to talk about your audience. Who do you need to influence in order to achieve your goal? This group is the audience for your stories. So who is the key person or group that needs to, whose action is essential for achieving your goal? If you want to get the city to allocate money, the key person or group might be the mayor or the city council. So I encourage you to think as narrowly as possible here. You may need to influence a lot of people along the way, but the final decision often turns on the action of one person or one group. So start thinking about who that is. Everything you do should lead to influencing that person or group. So what is the action? What do you want them to do? Again, you want to be specific. If the key group is the city council, and you'll need to get a majority of council members to vote to allocate the funding. This is what you'll be asking them to do, and the stories that you choose will help make the case for why they should do it. Finally, what groups and communities does your key person or group typically listen to? If your key person is the mayor, she might typically listen to business leaders who help get her elected. And this is essential for you to know if you're going to get her to act. You want to know who or what already makes her act. At the same time, what groups or communities can they not afford to ignore? So if your city council may primarily listen to small business owners, they may not be able to afford to ignore the mothers of school-aged children or seniors with limited mobility. Who that group or community is will vary depending on who you're trying to influence and what you're needing them to do. And now we're ready to start looking for stories. So we've talked about the why do you do storytelling, and we've talked about goals and audiences, and now we're finally going to talk about the stories. Whose stories best illustrate the need or the problem? This may be the neighborhood residents who have to use that uncontrolled intersection. Maybe it's those moms that we just talked about, or maybe it's the business owners who would benefit from being able to attract customers who walk or bike but currently can't get to their business safely. You want those people on your side, and you want to be able to tell their stories. Notice that these stories are the ones from the people who would benefit most from the needed change, as we've already discussed. And why are those stories likeliest to touch your audience? Again, this goes to what you know about the key person or group you're trying to influence. Is one of the city council members a mom, a small business owner? Do they live near the dangerous intersection and drive through it regularly? This is where your homework will pay off. You really want to know your audience very intimately. And finally, that brings us to methods. Now that you know whose stories are going to be the most useful, you're ready to pick your methods for telling those stories. Where and when will the stories be needed? If you're trying to win a city council vote on funding, you'll need those stories at and before the meeting. Knowing that, what are all the ways your stories could possibly reach your audience? This could be in a fact sheet that you send to the council member by email or snail mail. It could be through a phone call or a face-to-face meeting with each council member, as well as your 2 or 3 minutes for public testimony at the city council meeting. You could post the stories on social media, or you could tell them in an interview on the radio. The methods you choose should align with your goal and your audience, and you should be thinking of more than one way to reach your audience. You're also going to probably need more than one story, and that may or may not include your own story. So just keep that in mind. Again, that depends on what you know about your audience and who they listen to. So to use the example of the city council vote, you at least want to communicate with each council member individually before the meeting, and then also to the entire council at the city council meeting. If you need the support of 5 of the 8 council members on your city council, you might need 5 different stories, each one tailored to the individual council member. So keep that in mind. The process I'm describing here will be familiar to you if you've gone through a strategic planning process, because these are basically the questions that go into coming up with a strategic plan. And I'm essentially encouraging you to develop a strategic plan for your storytelling efforts. Once I had my head around this approach to planning, I found that I started to use it all the time. I would use it for every kind of project, specifically one that focused on achieving a defined and measurable goal. I could use it to track all kinds of tasks, from planning an advocacy effort directed at the city council to executing a year-end fundraising campaign. We're going to send you these 4 kind of categories of questions in a handout that's going to summarize what I discussed, so you can follow these steps as you look for stories. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Melissa.
So now I'm going to talk about how to actually format a compelling story. And I'm going to share with you a very simplified version of what's known as the hero's journey story arc, or shape. So research has shown, we're going to go back for a second.
Okay.
Research has shown that there are just about 7 universal story arcs or story shapes of all time throughout history, and 5 of them are known as hero's journey. The reason the hero's journey is such a compelling story type, and often best used for active mobility advocacy, is that it's not about winning. It's about transformation. Now we can go to the next slide. So it's about the struggle and the overcoming. And I don't know about you, but I think a lot of you can relate to the fact that there's a lot of struggle when we're dealing with active mobility goals and wants and needs. And so that's exactly what the hero's journey is about. The next slide. So stories have structure, and otherwise they're anecdotes. Next slide. stories are often shaped like a pyramid. They can have several different shapes, but they have a definite shape and they have a beginning, a middle, and an end. If they don't have a shape and a beginning, middle, and end, and they're just an anecdote, they're not nearly as satisfying, interesting, or compelling to the human brain. So remember, this is very ancient at us that we're wired for storytelling. Next slide. And for the simplified hero's journey, we have 5 stages. Excuse me. Sorry. We have 5, excuse me, stages. The first one is the exposition, and that sets the scene about what's going on in the story at the beginning. Then we have the rising action. Something happens to tip the hero, you, your colleagues, somebody you serve, to go on their adventure. The climax is the height of the story, where things turn and the most action happens. And then we have falling action, where, as you know, in movies, you think they're almost to the goal. You think Dorothy's almost to the end of the yellow brick road, and there's surprising twists and turns. And also often there's things such as enemies becoming allies. And then finally the resolution, the end, Dorothy gets home. So it's not actually the end of Dorothy's story, but it's the end for now. And that's something to keep in mind. So within, we're going to go back just for a second, Jim, sorry. Within this, remember I talked about struggle and overcoming. It's between the climax and the resolution that we have the struggle and overcoming of the hero. The hero also gets to see their world anew. And remember that this is where people that are reading, watching, or listening to you, we're going to get to see their world anew. Like, for example, a world without so many parking spaces. And there's aha moments. And again, maybe enemies turn into allies. Okay, so next slide, please. So in order for you to make better sense of this, so we're going to go back to Greta. One more.
There we
go. I'm going to share a story about the young climate activist Greta Thunberg, and specifically because I want you to understand, and I want you to share this with your networks, that anyone of any age, any education, any background can become and be a compelling storyteller for you and your advocacy work. It just takes some commitment. And Greta is the reason why, because even people that are considered introverts can be storytellers. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, back one more.
Yeah.
We're going to go back to the shape. Okay, so the exposition on this is that Greta is a young middle-class teen from Stockholm, Sweden, and she's a shy girl that nobody notices, and she sits in the back of the class. The rising action, nope, we're going to go back. The rising action is that the inciting incident is that in school, Greta learns about the climate crisis and that world leaders are basically not doing much to mitigate the upcoming disaster. And she gets so depressed about this information that she basically stops eating, and she loses so much weight that she stunts her own growth. The climax comes because she decides to do something about it. Now at home, she's already started to share with her parents charts and graphs about climate change, but it hasn't really got her parents to do anything until she wails at them, basically, stop stealing my future. Her mom is an international opera singer and basically stops flying just so that she can be a part of this new climate-friendly plan that Greta is so passionate about. She gets permission from her parents to strike on Fridays in front of the Parliament building for Stockholm. And she's a good student, so her parents let her. She asks her fellow students at school if they'll join her. They all say no. So she sits out there all by herself. Next slide. With her hand-painted sign. And because it's the center of government for the whole country of Sweden, the media finds her and they're enchanted with this girl who actually knows what she's talking about. Suddenly, she becomes a media darling. She also speaks several languages. It goes out through the English media. And she begins to use Twitter as her platform to invite children around the world to join her to strike. Well, now hundreds, then thousands, hundreds of thousands. And by the time COVID struck, there were millions of children and world leaders joining her on Fridays for climate strikes. The falling action is that Greta has been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, with obsessive compulsive disorder, and select mutism, which is she basically doesn't speak if she doesn't feel she has something important to say. But Instead of being shamed by this when the media wants to knock her off her pedestal, she embraces it through her Twitter platform and says this is the reason why she is able to be so focused and committed to her cause of fighting for climate justice. She, of course, starts to become criticized, and she says to everyone who will listen, she doesn't have the answers. She wants people to listen to the scientists, and she uses her platform to do that. The resolution of this story is in 2018, during her year off between high school and college. She's invited to come to the United States and speak to the UN Council on Climate Change. And the challenge, of course, is how is she going to get there, because she doesn't fly. The royal family of Monaco lets their team of Olympic sailors bring her on one of their ships. So there she is, giving testimony. She says 8 words in a sentence and then hands over the IPCC special report from October of 2018 that raised the alarm for all of us about how dire the situation is for climate change. So that's the ending for now. Next slide. So most of us don't have a story that's that dramatic, but each of us who are working for active mobility have a hero's journey story, as do your networks and those you serve. And as Jim said, it may not be your story that's the best story to share. It may be in your networks. But I want you to think about writing your own hero's journey story, because this is going to teach you how to do it, and then you can teach others as well. So think about the reason why you're so committed to the cause to work for active mobility. What's that story? Why is it so important for you that people can safely walk, bike, take transit, skate, scoot, you name it, and have a cleaner world, safer environment? What's that story all about? Next slide, please. Okay, so now it's time for your questions. What can we clarify for you? We're going to go back one, Jim, back to the questions. And we're going to ask, and how do we set it up so that we can unmute people so they can ask their questions?
I think what we have to do is we have to exit screen sharing, unfortunately.
All
this
right.
is one of the clunky things we have to do. So that way we can all see each other and we can also see the chat window. So I'm going to stop the screen sharing now and we will all see each other. There we are. Okay, wonderful. And then so we're open for questions. Go ahead and there's a hand next to your name over in the participant list, and that's a way to signal that you have a question. I'll click on you and unmute you, and then we can take your question. So if you see that over on the right side of your screen, there should be a list of participants. Like I said, we can also take a written question if that's just easier for you to do.
Okay, so is there anything about, I know it takes a little while for people to think of questions. So think back on whether it's how to do your own story, or what story is the right time to use when. What is it about this that isn't quite making sense? We have a couple people here who are already storytellers for us for the SLOCOG report, such as Sarah Della Ripa and
Miriam, so I
go.
think you're the first person to raise your hand. Why don't you go ahead with your question, please?
So my question is, like, what ultimately do you see us doing with this skill? Do you want us as a group to go out to government meetings, or are we helping to create a plan for the county? Like, what's the exact ultimate goal?
So that's a great question, Miriam. This is a part of, we've been hired to be part of SLOCOG's Active Transportation Plan 2021. And John Denunzio follows Pedal Love and has been to some of our workshops and some of our classes and wanted to bring storytelling into the plan. So we're in the process of collecting stories from about 8 people that are going to be included in the plan. 2 of the storytellers are here with us today, Audrey Supranet and Sarah Della Ripa. And we're in the process of getting the rest of them. They're going to be in the actual plan that's going to be submitted just in the next couple of weeks. There's also going to be stories that we're inviting you to share on the website. So you can write an essay, But the part of this that we want you to be prepared for your own work. So basically what we're doing is we're teaching these storytelling skills in this workshop, and then we have a workshop on January 21st, so that you feel empowered to give that 2-minute testimony or 3-minute testimony at a city council chambers. You feel when we can go out and meet in person again post-COVID or the vaccine, that you can have the elevator chat, you can have the cocktail party, you can have the phone conversation. It's basically, this is going to supercharge any advocacy work that you're already doing, because you're going to wrap the information that you're sharing with other people in your communications with storytelling in a fresh way that's going to get people to really understand you. You'll see the light go on. They'll be like, oh, now I know what you're talking about. You want us to have safer streets for everybody. And you'll be like, that's what I've been saying for the last 5 years. And something about your story is going to be what actually puts it together for you. So in the follow-up email, we'll have the Jim's worksheet with this tremendous tip sheet that he put together with how you pick the stories. And then my information is going to talk about how you put together your own hero's journey story. You may never decide to share your story, but if you know how to do that, then in the next workshop, we're going to teach you how to really go deeper into that storytelling strategy so that you start goal setting and you come up with measurable outcomes that you want to hit. Could be, do you want to have more engaged email newsletters, meaning you want more people to click through more times? You want to see that they're forwarding it to other people? Do you want more donations? There's still time that you could use a personally engaging story for your final end of the year ask. That's something that maybe you hadn't thought of. What are, as Jim was talking about, what are some of the infrastructure goals that you have for next year? And what are the sticking points that you have been dealing with? He was very strategic in talking about who you've got to influence. And you're going to start looking at everybody and thinking, what's the story that will, is it a story about children? Is it a story about disadvantaged communities? Is it a story about somebody who overcame diabetes because they walk and bike? So does that help? Does that make sense?
Could I add a few
yes,
things
please.
to that? We're not asking you to necessarily come up with a project that your stories would serve. I would say do it the other way around. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? And then work through that thought process about who do you need to, what do you need to get done? Who do you need to influence? And then you can start thinking about the stories. Because like I said, sometimes the story, your own story may not be the story that is going to be the most useful, but knowing how this works helps you listen for other stories that might be useful. It might help you encourage other people to tell their stories. It might help you collect those other stories and be the person who distributes them. So we're going to break this down a little bit more in the next workshop if that's something that you'd like to explore a little more deeply. It's a good question. Gary, you had your hand up next. Is Gary? There's Gary.
Gary, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, unmute first.
There you go.
How important is it a story should be locally sourced as opposed to one that might be maybe out of the area?
I think it depends on who your audience is and who you're trying to influence. So, right, Jim? I mean, it really,
yeah. I mean, Gary, if you're talking about trying to get a segment of 101 added to the US bikeway network that the Adventure Cycling Association is working on, it might be very helpful for you to talk about a town in Utah that made a choice very similar to the choice that needs to be made in SLO. Again, the story depends on what you're trying to achieve and what you know about your audience. And so there will be, like I say, different stories for different purposes, but it's not out of the question that a story from outside your area might be the most relatable, persuasive story to share. Does that help? Okay, awesome. Leah, your hand's up.
Yes, thank you. What do you do when you have more than one bike group with different goals and sometimes they conflict? And even if you try to work it out ahead of time, you go to the city council and the city council is hearing different requests. And sometimes you actually have had meetings with your decision makers and they have a really tough time because there's not a unified message from the bicycle community.
I'm going to go first. I know Jim's going to have a lot of thoughts, but I want to make sure that I share this. I would say that you invite them to something like a storytelling workshop with the two together, because what you need to do is you need to get both of them on the same page and find where there's actual synergy and where they can meet for that opening of hearts and minds, right? That softening of when you've got like really active, really fit, maybe more vehicular cyclists versus the people that want people from 8 to 80 to be able to safely use networked protected bike lanes. So I would put it out there, and I know Rick Ellison, I know you're listening too. I would put it out there to do something like this to bring the groups together. And I did a workshop with the California Bicycle Coalition when I was the media director there that was really profound. And what happens when you do an origin story jam is that you find out that people's origin stories about why they love to bike are very different than what you may think. So Jim, go ahead. I know you've got some great tips too.
Leah, that's a great question. And obviously, it's something that advocates in every community are going to be bumping up against. I would say the way to approach that is to recognize that your first goal might be to build bridges with the other group. So you're ultimately going to have to go to the city council and make a persuasive argument, but your first advocacy goal is to try to get everybody on the same page. And that's where figuring out who you need to influence. So if it's a competing bike club, you might figure out that there's one opinion leader in that group who really kind of sets the agenda for the whole organization. In other words, that's the audience for your story. And then, your goal is to build the bridge. The president of the club is the key person you need to influence. And then you want to figure out what's going to make that person listen to you. And that's where you can use stories. I think it's useful to point out that thought process, goals, audience, stories, methods can be used over and over throughout a campaign, because one goal might be to just get the meeting with the public works director. So you start with them and you figure out what makes the public works director tick, and then you have some stories that can help open that door with that person. And once you've got that person on board, maybe then your next hurdle is to get this to the city manager, right? So again, that arc isn't one arc for your entire campaign, but it's a logic process that you can apply to almost every step of the way. Because as we talked about, the story that influences the public works director might be very different than the story that influences the mayor.
And Leah, I want to share with you that the challenge you're talking about are challenges that I've seen throughout California and around the United States. And if you took it upon yourself to be somebody who brought everybody together in a room and used Jim's goals to connect bridges, and then you all went out for your goals, the results would be astounding. For you to come as united front to the city councils and public works would be really profound. But starting with a kind of a storytelling jam to get to the heart of where people are really coming from is, and in a respectful way that everybody can agree. The goals are that we're going to respect each other, and we're going to get to the heart of where our differences are, and we're going to agree to disagree in some places, but we're actually going to come much closer together in others.
Garrett, did you have a question? And we'll have you unmute yourself.
I actually didn't. I was just fiddling with my ring. So
all right.
It looked like a question, but it was not.
No worries, no worries. Anybody else? Rick, yes, please unmute yourself. Lower left corner.
Hi. Okay. Yep. Well, on my iPad, it's upper upper left.
Yeah.
So Jim and Melissa, thank you so much. Good overall information for us at a number of venues. I want to get a little more specific related to the SLOCOG plan. And are there things that we can do individually related to developing stories that help that project move along?
Yes. So, John, I'm not sure if you want to be put on the spot to give us a deadline from when we could have essays from people. And basically, the next steps that we're asking you to take, if you're interested in having your story on the website, there's going to be a beautiful website that David Figueroa and his team at DCR are putting together for the report that's accompany the report when it comes out. We're asking people, any of you, that we would love to have a personal story from you or a personal story from somebody in your network. And we'll share that information in a follow-up email so you have the specifics on it. And then the other thing that we're asking you to consider is in the early part of next year, so probably in late February, early March, we're going to get together and have a live storytelling jam. We're going to have a select few of you, if you're interested, and Sarah, I'm looking at you, and Audrey, I'm looking at you, to show us how it's done, to give live storytelling a chance, because we want people to see how effective this can be. And with that, you're going to be set up to do live storytelling as part of your outreach for Bike Month, Earth Day, and beyond. And of course, for the debut of the SLOCOG's actual report. So John, do you want to give us some deadlines of when people could have stuff to us so it can be edited to go up on the website? Do you have any information, or should we get that to them maybe tomorrow?
You know, talking about deadlines this close to the holidays is hard. Deadlines are like to eat Christmas cookies and stuff like that. But I will say that the timeline that you laid out with for the reveal in February or March is a good one. And also the information that you're saying, how the stories that you come up with, or stories that you know of, or listening to people in your network. I mean, this is almost like a power group here. And to sort of start this listening with the idea being on what's kind of on the horizon for us. So what should we all collectively as a power group be looking out for coming up? And that's what we're trying to, I guess, hear.
I'd like to add to that. Think about a problem you've identified and how your thinking has kind of developed around that problem. Maybe, and the story arc here could be, I've been trying to get from here to there by walking or biking, and I realize the reason I can't do that is because there's a freeway in the way. There is I have to cross 3 busy streets with no signals. And this is how I explored finding a solution for it. So that's certainly one way to think about what your story arc is. So it doesn't have to be your position paper on why bicycling is good for San Luis Obispo County. I would encourage you to be as personal as possible. It could even be as simple as, this is why I love being able to do what I do, right? The goal of the stories is to be relatable, right? You're making the data of this report and the purpose of this report relatable in human terms. And so the stories we incorporate into this project, into the report, onto the website, give a human flavor to content that otherwise is going to come across as fairly dry. You're going to have statistics, you're going to have budgets, you're going to have standards. That's all data. And that's, as Melissa pointed out, that's really important for the process. but what you're in a position to do is to help humanize that. You're providing kind of the human context for why is this important to do. And it could be that your favorite thing to do is to ride your bike with your grandkids, or it could be that your favorite thing to do is to walk from your house to the beach. It could be that simple, but what it does is it ties this report back to a human experience, and that's what makes it relatable. That's what makes your audience pay attention. That's what makes your audience feel empathy. That's what makes your audience feel motivated. And so your story is going to trigger those responses in the listener's brain. And by listener, we're talking about not only people who hear you speak that story, but even just reading it, right? The minute you read a story that explains why I'm looking at this report, it becomes more relatable to the listener.
So we really wanted to create a win-win-win, which is that we were honored to be invited by John and David to bring storytelling into the report, but we wanted to make sure that everything that we're teaching you and sharing with you then is something that sets you up to have more successful communication strategy for 2021 with storytelling at the core of it. And I'm going to end on this note, but David, I want to ask you if you want to give some final thoughts before we close. But the final thing here, because both Jim and I are communications people, is that you have a wonderful NPR station, you have some great media outlets. Being able to tell a short 2 or 3 minute story is really going to set you up to get your story in the press. And that's something that we in bike advocacy have not done that great job of. And right now, the press is really challenged. So you really need to spoon feed stories to them. And we can talk more about that in the next training. David, did you have any thoughts that you wanted to share with us before we close off for today?
Yeah, just a couple of things. And I'm David Figueroa of DCR Design, and we're helping deliver this first active transit plan from SLOCOG. And I think one of the things I find so interesting about this particular plan and this project is that it's using stories to liven up a plan. And a plan, historically, for me anyway, in the time I've been working with these, are notoriously difficult to get people to read, except for hardcore enthusiasts. In fact, even politicians who should be reading this sometimes have a very difficult time doing. They hire people to read plans and to boil them down into a page that they can read. And so I'm hoping that this could be a way to get more of the content read in a plan by more people. And maybe we'll save some money at public level if politicians can read them themselves and not have to hire staff to do that for them. And I apologize to any politicians that may be thinking that's criticism. I know that there's a lot to do, and there's a good reason for that. But we're hoping that together with the plan, with the stories and this platform that we're talking about, there's going to be easier access to link personal stories to these actual parts of the process, which we think is going to be valuable. And so I'm really glad that this workshop is happening, and I'm glad that SLOCOG is prioritizing this.
Beautiful, you explained it really well. And we've seen some previews, the stories of Audrey and Sarah Della Ripa. We've already seen a preview of what they look like. David and his team are putting together such a gorgeous report. I have never seen such a beautiful magazine quality. I'm sure that John will agree with me that it definitely looks like something you want to read. So we encourage you to be a part of that. So just to end with this, that we do have the storytellers for the report lined up. We don't have everybody for the website though, so we would love for you or to put the call out, or for you yourself to be one of those. We'd love to have you join us on the 21st for the next workshop. And you do not have to have been here today in order to be with us on the 21st. And then of course, in late February, early March, we're going to have a kind of a storytelling jam just like this, so people can tell their stories and see what it can bring and the kind of bridges it can build. Jim, final thoughts from you?
No, I think we've covered it. I encourage you to just think about, pay attention to all the stories that are around us all the time. You know, marketing uses stories very effectively. We we see an advertisement for a pharmaceutical product, and we are invited into the lives of the person who is living their best life because of this product. Well, that's storytelling in action, right? And I would say that those of us in kind of the environmental end of things maybe are a little late to that game. And so now is a chance for us to portray the human impacts of the things that we are eager to see happen in our communities. So my homework for you would be to just start paying attention to where you're hearing stories and how they make you feel. And that'll start to kind of wire you to be a lot more aware of where that can be useful to you.
John, would you like to end for us today?
You know, just to wish everybody a happy holidays season, and thanks for making time this side of that. We do hope that you find time to dig deep. I know for me, I came up with like 10 stories. It was there's just like, there's so many issues to choose from. But you know, we look forward to hearing from you in the new year. I hope this group can convene again as like a power group in the new year on the other side. So thanks.
Thank you all so much. We wish you very happy holidays, however that you celebrate it. We hope you and yours are going to be safe and well. More from us tomorrow. And of course, you can always email us with any questions that you think of after this time. We would be happy to answer them for you. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.